please just pause and I'll present myself and start the workshop in a moment. Write down what are the languages that are present for you in your life or in your experiences. Maybe you've got, a favorite language when you go on holidays. Maybe you feel a particular way. So just name the languages that are present for you in your life. Just put that in the chat. Okay, I've got German and music as a language for someone. Okay. English, German, Dutch, Norwegian, Polish. Oh, wow. It's a lot of languages. French and English. Oh, okay. Nice. Right. Okay. Ecological and English. The language of nature. I like that one. I had a blind spot. Don't think about that one. English, Hindi, Gujarati, a little bit of Swahili. I need to find the right stuff in the Polish of the Body language, we've got Russian, Latvian, English, TA, love language, music, English, French, Latin, Greek, tiny bit of Portuguese, language of art. Okay, I think we can start. So we're supposed to be, I think maybe more, but let's start with everyone. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. It is a pleasure to be with you. My name is Piotr Jusyk. I am a PTSD in the field of counseling, and I'm an intercultural counselor. That's how I describe myself, because I work a lot with people who moved abroad, who it may be someone, let's say a Mexican man who moved to Poland, or it may be a Polish man who moved to Mexico, or it may be someone who's Guatemalan who lives in Germany. Yeah, so I'm very, very curious about that piece of intercultural transition. I was an educator, teacher for many years. I was working in international schools, and it's something that really touches me. It's at the intersection of privilege, because those who have money and specific passports get to travel and enjoy the world, or those who have got access to education. Yeah, so we're not talking just about like fancy stuff, but it's about inclusion. So it is a very, very sensitive area as well. Yeah. Okay. So we're looking at languages today. Yeah. It's about many languages in one okayness. That's a big aspiration, isn't it? For a start, I'd like to mention that, language shapes our experiences, our sense of self, our relationships. It's a lot about language in therapy, counseling, coaching, and it's also about the nonverbal stuff. As you will see in this workshop, I will also explore with you the parts of the, if you like, the nonverbal part of language that's felt. Okay? So let's start with some examples for a start and weaving contact between us. So I'm going to share some examples of language to invite you into some curiosity. So first of all, what are the accents that you consider sexy? That's my question to you. Is it the French one, a Cockney one, received pronunciation, or maybe a Polish one? Yeah. So what languages do you consider sexy? There's some people coming still. Let me just admit all. Yeah. What languages do you consider sexy? And then another example from a different part of the world. So I'm speaking to you from Antigua, Guatemala, the other side of the world. There are actually 22 indigenous languages here, apart from Spanish, hyper diverse. So in one of the indigenous languages where I was collaborating with the research center, the question, how are you, is translated as, how are your eyes today? If you're fine, you say, my heart is open. And so that's a very interesting frame that the language introduces, right? We talk about saying hello in transactional analysis. We look at transactions. Yeah. So what an interesting transaction. When I go to buy vegetables from my vegetable lady at the market, I come and she says in Spanish, "¿Cómo están sus corazones?" How are your hearts today? Yeah, it's an interesting one. She makes that translation. Okay. An interesting piece is that when you talk about nature, something that Kate mentioned, when you talk about nature, you don't use possessive pronouns. So you cannot say my mountain, my lake. Nature does not belong to anyone, it belongs to everyone. Yeah, so it's interesting, even the level of language, you cannot own a nature. That's kind of, the grabby individual Western frame, possibly. You can only use possessive pronouns when you're in a Mayan ceremony, when you want to express gratitude to nature. Thank you, my mountain. Thank you, my lake. Yeah. Look how much is happening already with language. Yeah. So you can express that tenderness. Another word that I found that really fascinated me is a word that comes from Nahuatl, which is a language, it's an Aztec language used more in Mexico. And the word is apapachar, which means to hug someone with your whole soul. Yeah. How did I learn this word? I was coaching a director of an NGO, and she said to me she didn't want to be a mama apapachadora. She didn't want to be this rescuing parent to her employees. We're talking about being structuring and not being all huggy and lovey-dovey. Yeah. So that's how I've learned that. And another word that I love in Spanish is empiernar, which means to wrap your legs around someone when you're in bed. There's a specific verb for that. Yeah. So with that in mind, I just wanted to share you, well, there is a whole universe around language and the languages we speak or the words we have can enrich you. They can create resources for your new experiences. And I'm mindful that people have different experiences of learning another language. You don't have to speak another language fluently. Maybe it's not something that you like particularly, or maybe you had teachers that gave you a script message. You're not good at that. It's more about expanding you in a way that's curious and nurturing. Okay. So this is me making contact with you. I'm going to share with you the presentation. After that, we're going to contract a bit more. Okay. Well, what I put forward in terms of contracting and put in the chat is that, well, this workshop is recorded. Okay, so if you would like to share something, please be mindful that it's recorded. And if you don't want this to be recorded, I'll put the pause button as well. Okay, we can also edit that out. You will need some stationery, some colored pencils to draw. So please grab that right now or in a minute. I've got lots of things to prepare. I'm very nerdy about it. I always over prepare. So we were going to go with the flow. I want to stay with you rather than, throwing more theory or whatever. Yeah. And it's an active workshop. If possible, I would love people to put their cameras on. And I also appreciate that you may be cooking lunch for your kids or whatever's happening on Zoom. Okay. So now, in terms of contracting, what I would like to share with you or invite you to do, name either a thought or a feeling or a behavior, any of these, that you believe is going to be useful for this workshop. Okay. Contracting sometimes feels dead. What contracting is about activating the adult. Yeah. So please put in the chat one, or it can be more, thought, feeling, or behavior that you believe is useful. Okay, and I'll stop sharing this. Humor. Okay. Right. Love. Oh, I like that one. Openness. Curiosity. Excitement. Ooh. Excited. Energy. Vital. Right then. So all of the bits around contracting. So we've got these words around playfulness being vital, everything you see in the chat, plus what I outline. Is there anything else about this workshop that needs to be clarified? Any other questions? A meta view. Oh, okay. I'll do my best. Do my best, John. Okay, so just to let you know as well, so I see that, well, we've got some people have got the cameras on. I will, at the later point, I will put you into breakout rooms for specific skills practice around the model that I'm going to present to you. Okay, so let's just kick off with our first exercise then. So with your pencils and your piece of paper, this is the exercise I'd like to share. So go back to those languages that I mentioned to you at the beginning, yeah? So draw an outline of a human figure. Think about the languages you speak or that you have some experience of, yeah? It really doesn't matter how well you know the language. Include different dialects, your regional language variations, specialized language, your intimate or friendship language, and your TA language. Where do you experience these languages in your body? So intuitively draw your experience. Yeah, you've got some examples here. So you're going to create what's called your linguistic portrait. And you're going to have 10 minutes for that in pairs. How was it for you? So I'm curious what came up in that exercise, and you can actually do a whole hour on this, exercise. You can see how it's opening up different things. So yeah, tell me, what were the experiences or what came up?
It was lovely for me, a lovely experience. And my colour was in the heart area. And it brought up for me the French accent. I mean, I don't speak very good French, but I have a long association with France because when I was young at school, when they say, "Do you want a pen friend?" And I said yes, and sort of wrote to this person in French, and she wrote in English. And I'm still in touch with her all these years later, and I know her family, and so it really gets to my heart. I've been across there lots of times, and she's been here. So
yeah, I suppose the love is there, isn't it?
it is. It really is. Yeah, we're really good friends. Just really connect. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Thank you. What about others?
No.
Any other experiences?
Oh, sorry. Yes, sorry. What I noticed in conversation with Thea was that I was experiencing a head response or a soul, tummy, intuitive response to how we were talking about language. And they were oscillating between the two, and the head wasn't, it was a darker response to language, like the English language, and how narrowing that can be if you're born English. Rather than expansive, whereas ecological myth story was very tummy-centered for me, kind of warm and glowing, and had a different tone. And Thea was talking about colloquial around the UK, and that felt warmer. But it was between the two centres and a little bit of heart, but more those two centres.
Oh, nice. And I want to pick up on something, and Bina, you wanted to speak. I'm just mindful as well that I would be just also careful to say, only speaking one language can be narrowing because we're in a way products of context and colonization. We have not chosen those histories. We got born into that. I think we can sometimes take things from the context and make ourselves responsible. Yeah, Bina.
Yes, thank you. We kind of the pairing we had. It's really interesting because when you asked Pietro, about the sexy language, I put down Hindi because I find Hindi is a very poetic and very, very sexy language when you get into it. And the second language I put down was Italian, and I was paired with an Italian person. It's really interesting how the unconscious mind works. So I think for me, I shared that when it's love, I can feel it in my heart. So when I feel like something's really sexy, really warm, really nurturing, my heart just feels very full and very, very contented. Whereas if it's something that's like, for instance, feedback or an exam situation, I feel very anxious, and usually it's around my shoulders and around my neck. So those are the sort of body parts I recognize, and I guess sometimes it's my head as well. So if I'm doing a lot of thinking, like finding options, working with different options, I engage a lot of my head in there. So it's really interesting how we engage different parts of our bodies when we are doing different tasks, or when we are met with love, or whether we are met with scare. It's really interesting exercise for me.
Mm. And notice that the energy in some way is a bit upbeat. I'm not saying it has to be. The idea in the counseling field is that we're getting really curious around people's resources and what uplifts them. I was reading a book about transcultural counseling last week, and there was this beautiful phrase which said, "Nobody comes to counseling with no skills." That it to really account for the field. John, would you like to say a bit more of what you've put, or would you like me to read it out?
I'm happy to speak. So, I mean, it's partly in response to the lady that spoke before, Kate. I think all language can be remarkably expressive, and as well as other languages and the impact of other languages and the not knowing. I definitely admit, like, English is a fantastic language. I probably use less than half the words that are available in the English language. And I'm sure that if I found out more about my own language, I would be able to express myself with more finesse.
So you're saying there are opportunities. You're saying there's a low-hanging fruit that you can...
That's a really succinct way of putting it. Nice.
Yeah. It's interesting when we do something out of play rather than having to.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to walk you through. Well, we're going to have a break at an hour, but I've got a presentation. I'm going to speak to you about various aspects of language. So your experiences will be hung on to the theory right now. Okay, I will see how much we get to. I'd like to eventually present this model of it's called ego state timeline model. That's a model that my friend from Poland figured out. He's an academic. So we're having conversations, me more as a practitioner, him as an academic, and I can put that paper into the chat, and you're welcome to download it as well. Okay. So here we are. And if you have questions, you want to raise your hand, please feel free to interrupt and ask. All right. This is when the presentation is getting a little bit, come on. There we go. Okay, so what you have just experienced, it was a linguistic portrait. Linguistic portrait is that exercise from a lady called Brigitta Busch. That's the references here. I went to a lecture by her, actually, and she introduced this exercise also maybe like 4 years ago in London. And she wrote a paper about the linguistic repertoire being, revisited. It is actually a concept from a linguist from the 60s. And what it is the totality of your linguistic resources, and they're available to members of a particular community. Yeah, so for instance, you may realize there's all sorts of variations of language, and it's a particular community that speaks it. I can imagine, for example, that there will be different versions of Hindi. I imagine Bina, yeah, that there will be, depending where you go, yeah, different communities have a different flavor. So there is this whole library, this whole universe inside you. And then every shelf will be a different language. And those different books will be those different styles, the slang, the register, and your TA language. Yeah. I actually presented this workshop for the Bern Institute a few days ago, and we're looking actually at how TA language can be consistent across different languages. We created a word which was interlingual. Yeah, so we were just playing with that. Yeah. Depending on the situation where you go, you have that specialized language. It's context dependent. That lady, Brigitte Bush, she says that linguistic repertoire is not something static, but rather achieved situationally. So it's achieved situationally. What it means, that people that you're going to hang out with, you're going to pick up their language. The language is going to be your resource. It's going to be a whole universe of being. Okay. So for instance, I had to learn TACC language when I was working as a teacher in South London in a pupil referral unit. So every day I was coming to work and the kids were telling me to F my mum and what's not. I needed to toughen up. One of the teaching assistants told me, Piotr, you're going to have to grow a pair of balls, like me, gay guy, coming over there with these kids from South London. They were just ripping me apart, yeah? I needed to pick up some of these resources and language, okay? So then I changed this job. I did that for 6 years, and I ended up working in a very posh international school where we had to, be very polite, and children were paying, lots of money to be in that school. So it was a different linguistic repertoire. It's a different situation. So again, counseling is about resources and about helping people in transition to figure out what they need to adjust, to manage their problems well. Counseling is about learning, it's about growth, development, problem management, and knowing what is the language that is used to describe a situation gives you clues. Now, how can we consider different linguistic setups in training, in counseling, coaching, educational work? Well, the most obvious one is the native one. Yeah, so probably the one that you experienced at school, or maybe not, or maybe your school was multilingual. Okay. When we consider the English language and how TA is taught in the English language, my sense is that when it is transmitted in the English language, there is a degree of accuracy around concepts. So let's say the word stroke, it's translated into French as signe de reconnaissance, which is sign of recognition. It's translated in the same way in Polish. Sign of recognition sounds a bit dry, and it loses that original playful meaning. I mean, it's a stroke. You can stroke a cat, or you can get a stroke. Yeah. So that captures the concept. Yeah. When it's translated into another language, sometimes it acquires new meaning. Sometimes there are certain words that I find are pretty useful in Spanish. And sometimes we lose the original meaning. So it's a bit of a guessing game sometimes, actually, to find what works. We can also have non-native setups. So let's say when I work in Guatemala, everyone has got Spanish as their first language. I'm the only person who speaks Spanish, as another language. Yeah, so there is difference. So some people can feel excluded. So let's say towards the end of the day, after seconds, I can go into a little bit of a victimy mode when the air conditioning is on and I don't understand what people are saying, because I just simply cannot hear it. I also find that with the non-native setup, we need to be mindful, what is the status and power of a particular language? Because there may be slight competition to sound near native. Yeah, so like the myth of the native speaker. Yeah. Where is this? Yeah, I've got this. This is the book of a lady. I based my work a lot on that. This is a book called Other Tongues. It's in the references. I'll put it at the end. This is a lady called Beverly Costa, and she opened a counseling center in Reading, I believe, where they provide counseling in over 300 languages. That's pretty amazing. And she talks about the idea that English speakers have got, they can enjoy what she calls linguistic privilege. Okay. So some languages have got a greater status. So I suppose it's better to speak French or Italian, let's say, than, let's put it, Hungarian or let's say, or Slovakian or Polish. Yeah. So some languages are more widespread, and that influences the psychological contract. I can see. Okay. In UK, it's often joked, if you need to know correct English grammar, ask a foreigner. So it can really go both ways, I think. Yeah, that is also true. Yeah, that's also true. Because you acquire the language in a different way. Yeah. And finally, we also have got multilingual setups. Yeah, when you go to a TA conference or lots of parts of the UK where you've got many languages spoken at the same time. In some way, it is a challenge because it can create those sorts of dynamics around inclusion, exclusion, questions around belonging and identity. And yet, there's an opportunity. My sense is that if we can figure out the complexity of all these threads, we can create community. So this sense that you can have at a TA conference where there's something that's shared and you have a sense of belonging, there are different languages spoken, and at the same time, we need to be sensitive to each other. So high intercultural sensitivity is a must. And to my mind, it creates that opportunity for connecting with common humanity. Okay, so there's another, yeah. Oh, thank you. Thank you, Rajita, thank you. Okay. So these are the different setups we can have in counseling and training. David, yes, please, go ahead.
Yes, super quick. Somebody mentioned something about meta something in the beginning. I don't remember exactly, but I think my question is somehow related to this because you mentioned TA, and I've been to your previous workshop, as you probably remember, and I really love your intercultural frame in general and around languages. So I think both TA and this intercultural thing are a sort of a meta thing in a sense because they transcend boundaries, I guess. And I'm wondering if you can say anything. I don't know exactly what my question is, but I love TA for this capacity to unite people across countries, and this intercultural frame is another thing like this. So I'm curious if you've identified other such languages like this, which are important to you, which have this sort of meta quality to them.
Interesting, huh?
Astrology is one. I mean, not, certain types of astrology can be, for example.
For me, the meta perspective here is that there are languages, it's about containing complexity, because some languages will accurately express something, some will not. And we're in the aspect of light. So thank you for mentioning that model of intercultural work that you feel is useful. And my sense is that this talks about the aspiration and possibility, and there is also a shadow that some people cannot be part of that, Some people cannot afford to learn English in some parts of the world. I can see that with our trainees. So there are shared frames and belonging for a selected few. So I think maybe the meta here is, can we see the part of our system that it can be also excluding or not available to all? Perhaps that's a better. And impacts people and excludes subtly or maybe not subtly.
Okay. Yeah. That's thank you for that. I think that's often easily overlooked, what you just mentioned.
Yeah, it's how do we hold polarities? Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so as you just spoke, I needed to take and even the perspective is, I think we love our theory sometimes, and our theory can be egocentric. So I noticed I had to sort of like do this. So perhaps that's another aspect. Yeah, lots to think. Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Invitation to meta. Okay, let's not get too precious about what we've got, and also see its value. Okay, so let me just move on. All right. So some reflections on language. We know that people feel differently in different languages. That is a fact. Yeah. So you haven't mentioned that. Describing those different sensations. Okay. We also know that people make moral decisions differently in a foreign language. So the classic experiment when there is a train on the track, and then there's a person who needs to press a button. And if they press a button, there will be only one person killed, okay? Because the train will be sidetracked. If they don't press the button, 30 people will be killed or something. People tend to make a choice in a foreign language that results in one person being killed. In other words, the decisions are less emotional, they're more thought through. And here is the piece. That Norwegian lady, Lingra, she has an article in Relational TA, one of the Relational TA books. And her statement, her thesis is that the foreign language acts as a buffer between parent and child. So you introduce a new language, and all of a sudden you have to just stop and think, how do I want to say that? Is this what I really mean? Now, I add to that, well, it really depends, because you may have an experience that you know a language a little bit and you feel like a, inadequate kid, yeah? Or you pick up some symbolism from another language that somehow works for you. Yeah. So I see that language impacts all ego states and in different ways. So it may resonate with different survival conclusions. That's what Vanita English introduced, that thing. In other words, injunctions. Yeah, so depending on the age of acquisition of the language, it will resonate with different conclusions, with different parts. I personally decided to go back to therapy in my first language because I could work in English quite comfortably. But let's say if I have to run this workshop in Polish, I'm not going to be as confident. I get in touch some of my past difficulties. So, for example, being a gay man in the 90s, growing up as a gay teenager, I was beaten up a few times by skinheads. So in some way, I associated my first language with a lack of agency. Yeah. So it's really important to see that in a broad way. Yeah. There's no one size fits all. Okay, and then again, we've got, so these are the different survival conclusions, how the language will resonate with different parts of the child, or we take on board symbolism from the culture. Okay, and going further is that when we introduce awareness around language, we need to hold the anxieties that evokes in a proactive way. That means that we ask sometimes a client, okay, so How is it for you to speak English? What does my accent mean to you? Yeah. It's really about introducing active dialogue. It can be a resource and it can be something that limits the process. Yeah, sometimes perhaps if someone projects their sense of inadequacy onto language, that can be a hindrance. Okay? Language is a source of power, as I mentioned before. It's linked with status. And your level of proficiency in a particular language will give you a certain sense of agency. Okay? And as I put it here, language can be considered as a double-edged sword. If we consider clients who receive trauma counseling, who've been through, say, forced migration, they can go to another country and they may prefer to have their counseling in another language because the original language is related with trauma. Okay? And yet, being sensitive about that is key. With some of my clients in Latin America or with some of my Polish clients in the UK, I sometimes speak English because they don't have that limiting influence of the script. It's as if they can reinvent themselves. Yeah. And still, I think I found it in the Hello book by Ben. Ben thought that scripting happens in the original language. I believe that's true, and I think that script can be rewritten. So I lived in 4 different countries. I've learned, well, my first language was Polish. I've learned TA in English, and now I teach and supervise it in Spanish. And I sort of see that it's a kind of, it's as if I was maybe running away from my script a little bit, and still it's trickling in. Yeah, so that's why I decided, well, I need to have a personal process in Polish. Okay, so lots of sensitivity. Okay. How are we doing? Okay. So let's introduce the idea of a frame of reference. Good old Schiffian theory, yeah? And I've put the definition because it's so actually confusing that it's good to revise it, yeah? So what is a frame of reference? It is a structure. So let's say you're going on a date. And there will be particular rules about who pays the, for the bill, and it's related to gender. Yeah. When are you supposed to kiss, and so on? That would be the frame of reference. So it's this structure. Yeah. So we've got of responses that integrates the ego states to specific stimuli is the date. The response is who gets to pay the bill. Yeah. And it tells you who you are in that situation and how to act. Yeah. So it's that piece, it's that conceptual, affective, and action set. Yeah. So in other words, you know who you are. If you're in a particular macho culture, let's say Latin America, you need to pay for the, if we're talking about a heterosexual relationship. Yeah. It's interesting as well talking about that, how those different patterns, can get superimposed onto, let's say, gay relationships, because we've got this lesbian friend who told us she heard from another friend who was lesbian. She told me, you're not quite gentlemanly. I'm not sure how to translate that. Yeah, no eres tan caballerosa. Yeah, so it's interesting how those gender polarities also can be superimposed onto homosexual relationships. Okay, so here's the frame, and I'd like to introduce another idea, which is the cultural frame of reference. So the frame of reference is the skin that surrounds the ego states. The cultural frame of reference, it's like muscles, okay, underneath. So they give you certain reflexes and responses, especially when you meet someone from a different group. So it gives you an idea of who you are when you interact with people who are different from you. Yeah. And you're going to have different ideas over that. So let's say, for myself, I'll have the idea of being a cisgender man, being a gay man, being a Polish, being, a Spanish speaker. I have all these different categories. And depending on the situation, some of them will come to the forefront and some will go to the background. And it's really important to know what is the part of the cultural frame of reference that influences the interaction. Yeah. So the example I give sometimes, for instance, is as a counselor, I was supporting a group of women, a multicultural group of women in Guatemala who was supporting rape victims. It was like a community group. And there are women from Argentina, Italy, France, Germany, all over. Nationality was not so important for them. They did not have multicultural problems. What was important, the category of being a woman was important. Yeah. So to navigate a situation, it's important to ask myself, where is this coming from? Okay. So I see the interaction of the frame of reference, the cultural frame of reference, and what's happening in the ego states. Yeah. In practice, it's all interwoven. Okay. I don't think we can as easily pinpoint. We know these are models. Yeah. And we know that actually, this is a story. It's not the ultimate reality. Okay. We've got those different layers. And now let's see how actually language impacts ego states. Yeah. So we've got the interplay of ego states. So it may be that like in my case, my child ego state speaks Polish. My adult speaks, Spanish and English, let's say, and Polish too. Yeah. So there's all sorts of inner dialogues. Now, how can you apply that? When you work with a multilingual client, you can ask them to speak to an empty chair in their first language. You don't have to understand it, but to say, how would you say that? And maybe play with the words, and something will happen. For example, sometimes I go hiking in the mountains of Guatemala, and I got lost once, and I met this group like of 3 indigenous women, and they speak Spanish, and I asked them, okay, where do I go? I was a little bit panicky, and they explained where I needed to go. And then I said Matios, which is in the Cachiquel Mayan language. And I could just see that they were beaming. Yeah. Yeah. So, it speaks to something. Yeah. Okay. So we've got that interplay of ego states. It will awakens the child when you speak someone's first language, or even when you show them respect. And that's the individual frame of reference. If you can see the value of someone's language. Yeah. So, for example, being Polish, we like to complain. Yeah. So my husband sometimes says to me, "Oh, I can see your Polish heart is just really enjoying, a good old, complaining session." Yeah. And when he says that, it just feels so validating, and it's so nice. I really can be, I can really be sometimes negative or complaining. Yeah. But this is a way of bonding, and that's part of the the cultural frame of reference. Yeah. With the individual frame of reference, what is that's an interesting one, because you see all of these concepts are getting interwoven. I will come back to what the shifts were saying. The shifts say that the script is part of the frame of reference that contains discounts. Okay, I'll repeat that. A script is the part of the frame of reference that contains discounts. Yeah, very useful. I mean, it's one of the ways to look at script, yeah? So as a counselor, I can look in the individual frame of reference. What is the meaning that's individual for that person? That example about the date, yeah? So maybe someone actually comes from a family where it's important to be giving. And I can identify that as a resource in the individual frame of reference. Yeah. And how I can validate that, for example. Yeah. So do you see different layers? If I just say, oh, you just want to be a macho guy and invite, the lady in pay, but maybe there's other stuff. Yeah. So I invite you to hold in complexity. Yeah. And we also have got our scripts, so there are discounts. Yeah. So, maybe you want to be a macho man and you do want to actually, make up for something. Yeah. Who knows? Yeah. So it's about finding layers. And then again, stroking filters. For me, stroking is about love. And we're talking about it today in Okayness and Love. Nicole had her keynote speech. Yeah, I saw part of that in AdFest, very touching. So, how much love is available for a particular client in a particular language or in the current frame? What is their language of love? What do they mean by love? I actually have someone from Australia who has got a Russian partner. And to some extent, the Russians and the Poles were very matter-of-factish. We don't do like fluffy stuff, you know? And so, love can be expressed through wordplay, through intellectual prowess, through jokes, through being curious, through discussing literature. Yeah? So how is love expressed? Yeah, that's the question. I've got another 15, 20 minutes of stuff, and I'm going to introduce this model, and then you're going to go into pairs and coach each other. But you don't have to speak another language for that. Well, we all speak English. We've got one medium. It's enough. What do we have? Okay. So let's delve a bit deeper. So this is the summary of what I was just talking about, but in a way that's linear. Yeah, so I welcome, you're welcome to have a read. And you will get that presentation, so. So many layers. We want to appreciate the layers because it's where we find those resources that help people to adjust, solve their problems, and increase their autonomy, right? That's what counseling in transactional analysis is about. Okay. I'll go to the next slide then. So let's look at the second order structural model and using the English language as an example, okay? So in terms of the parent, we introject the culture, the cultural parent, by Carl Drago, gets introjected. If I consider the English language, in my experience, and it may be different for you, I experience that there is an etiquette of giving straightforward answers, yeah? It is, someone's asking a question, you give an answer, that is it. What are the techniques or the technical aspect of language? English is a noun-centered language. That means that if we've got two phrases, let's say, we analyze the data or the data was analyzed, we would speak more the data was analyzed. Yeah, so this is more about expressing something through nouns, okay? Which some linguists, or there's a paper about weird societies from one anthropologist, who talks about what are the Western societies versus other ones. So some researchers say that that feature of being, non-centered, it's about assigning properties. And many other languages are actually verb-centered. They're more about actions, about processes. Yeah. So some people make the argument that the English language can be seen as assigning properties. Okay. And that has got some implications, but I'm not giving it any value judgment. So we've got that noun-centered techniques of the language. And also, something got lost over here. It's also what I did not add over here. The English language is low context. I'm going to explain that. What you see is what you get. Yeah. Some languages, you have to go around the houses. In the English language, what you see is what you get. And for me, there is a character of pragmatism. So I remember when I was learning English, and there's those things like you have to write a report, write a letter of complaint and whatnot. So I wrote like a whole page of complaining. And my teacher said to me, you can't do that. You need to offer a solution. What is it that you want to get out of that? Yeah. I mean, some people talk about the stiff upper lip, okay, just get on with it. Yeah, so it's that pragmatism. Yeah, we could make that argument. I also appreciate there may be different views over here, okay? Now, in the child, we've got in the P1, so in the parent and the child, we've got idealizations and demonizations. So that's splitting. So if you are a speaker of English, you might sometimes say, oh gosh, I don't speak a foreign language. Yeah, there's a little bit of a pause and thinking, oh gosh, I should explain myself possibly. Yeah. Or sometimes some people report having English as a second language, feeling that English speakers actually get it. They understand things more. Yeah, so they demonize themselves. Okay, so we've got that splitting around demonization and idealization. When we go into the little professor, there's a phenomenon called translanguaging. So when people speak to languages and they mix them up. Yeah. So for example, can you pass me the basso, which is in Spanish? Yeah. Have you ever had people mixing two languages when they speak? Yeah. That's the kind of intuitive sense. Yeah. Very common for people who are multilingual. And finally, in C1, we've got that bodily sense, what you portrayed in your drawings, yeah, in your linguistic portrait. Yeah. There is a bodily feeling associated with language. We say that language gets inscribed into the body. So it's both a body experience that you can explore visually through that linguistic portrait, and it's also something abstract that creates narratives. So it's both. It's concrete and abstract. Yeah. So with that swearing, yeah, that sense when you swear something, it gives you like this sense, you're like, oh, for fuck's sake, like, it's like, yeah, it gives you that sense of body satisfaction. And if I ask you to swear in another language that you don't know so well, you wouldn't have that bodily sense, yeah, that discharges emotion as well, okay? So that's what happens in the second order structural model. Now, the A2, according to many authors or a few, there are people who Bernd talked about logos in terms of language, but also A2 is the kind of least investigated part. We don't really have that perspective on our own language because this is all what we know, okay? And there are some bits that we can look at. So there are things like low context and high context. So low context languages and cultures are those ones that are very straightforward, very linear. You ask a question, you get a yes or no answer. It goes straight to the point. Yeah, agreements are straightforward. People do what they say in the sense that basically, it does what it says on the tin. Yeah, what you see is what you get. For high context languages, it's all about putting the message together through nonverbal cues, through all sorts of messages together. It's about figuring it out together. Like you see those two people putting the pieces of puzzle together. There is some ambiguity. So you see there's kind of, that invisible line in between the head. They kind of know it. Yeah. So there's just lots of contextual cues and information. To give you an example, do you sometimes get those WhatsApp messages from some clients, those kind of voice messages, like 3 to 5 minutes explaining why they couldn't come to a session, or something? That's very common in Latin America. You hear the story about the dog, you hear the story about the grandma, you hear the story about, what they had for lunch and what the traffic was. And in the end, they tell you, I'm sorry, and I can't come. Yeah, that is high context. So you see what's happening that speakers of low context languages, like for, let's say, me as a speaker of English or Polish, we like straightforward things. Yeah. So you might see a speaker of high context as being deceiving, not being concrete, not giving you the answer. Then again, for speakers of high context, those guys that speak low context, so let's say, if an English person speaks to a Japanese person may feel that the English speaker is rude. You know, when we consider different therapeutic operations like specification, do you remember that one? I had a discussion with Nicole about that. In the Japanese language, she had a Japanese candidate. You cannot specify things. This is extremely rude. It's like you're just taking off someone's underwear and leaving them naked. You're not supposed to do that. Yeah. So it's like for those high context speakers, the low context guys are rude. Yeah. Let me give you an example. I went to a shop and I wanted to buy myself a speaker, one of those electronic shops. And in Guatemala, you need to have your passport or a document when you want to pay by card. It's kind of a preventative measure because the crime rate is quite high. And so the lady's asking me at the counter, excuse me, do you have a passport? And I just say, no. And do you have a picture of it? No. And then she's just like typing this and saying to a colleague, and she's like, oh my God, he's so rude. Yeah. So it's all about a dance. Yeah. So you see, a low context language speaker could say, this is a problem. Can we talk about that? And you get an answer, well, it's going to be difficult. And it's tough. It's tough and it's not straightforward. Yeah. So to come to agreement between the two takes a while. Yeah. And maybe sometimes we don't have to come to an agreement as well. Okay, another part of language, of A2, that we can take into consideration is how formal or informal the expressions are. When you're speaking in a formal language, let's say, and you've got, also I didn't mention, so the informal or also quite often low context, that is in North America, in Europe, and in Australia. And those formal languages, that's Latin America, where or also French is a formal language, Polish, Middle East, and Japan. Yeah, so it's where you have special forms. Like in Spanish, you would use usted. In French, you would use vous. In English, you say, well, sir, madam. Yeah, but you don't have a specific form of a verb for that. You just say, how are you, sir? You use the just second person. Yeah. And that can be confusing because, all sorts of psychological games develop over here. Yeah. I notice quite often. It's interesting how racism and white supremacy gets perpetuated. I sometimes see, or in the shop, I see that a person of white complexion would use an informal form to someone who's maybe of darker skin, and the person of darker skin would use the formal, yeah, totally excluding. Nobody really thinks about that. Yeah, it's an interesting one because it helps you to sniff out the psychological contract. I mean, just to even let you, it's some of the things that I have seen. I went to rent a house once, or I wanted to look at a house, and there was a little room over there that only had a bed, and basically it was like a little cell. And I'm asking the estate agent, what is this for? And he tells me, oh, this is for the help. This is modern slavery. Yeah. So I gave obviously a lecture about intersectionality to the guy, but I was just very, very shocked. And yeah. So you can see how a language permeates into social structures that can be abusive, oppressive, that can perpetuate white supremacy or any forms of exclusion. I think also misogyny, homophobia, all sorts of things. Yeah, all sorts of things can happen through language. Yeah. Why do I mention that? Because I don't know how to navigate it. I was running a group in Polish and I was speaking to everyone in a formal way. They all thought I was just, got out of the 1960s, and I was speaking very formally to everyone. Yeah, it's you have to feel what's right in the context. Okay, so let's look at the heart of the matter, what I wanted to share with you. All of this that I spoke about, actually, in this paper that I'm citing over here with my colleague, he put several theories together, like linguistic determinism, yeah? So meaning that the languages you speak determines the world you live in, yeah? For example. Also, looking at NLP and the idea of, how do we can put things on a timeline, yeah? So the temporal aspects, yeah? You're very welcome to check out the details, how this model came about. But essentially, you can put the three ego states on an axis of time. And you can consider what's happening in each ego state and what happens in the speech. And this is an interesting way of considering coaching conversations. Yeah. So I'm going to give you an example in a moment. Yeah. So you'll see how looking at the frequency, looking at what gets spoken about and in which ego state helps you to identify areas of discounting. So let's look at the next slide. This is taken from court mediation. My colleague works as a mediator in a court. So let's listen to these transactions. First one, I won't agree to this. Yeah, so we can have a present parent ego state. Then, because he keeps making serious mistakes, we've got the adult, present adult. See the crossover here in the middle. I don't trust him. Present child. And then he misled me in the past. That's adult in the past. And I suffered a lot because of him. Yeah, so that's child in the past. So we see that in the mediation situation, so what you can do is actually listening to someone, and this is about actually playing with it. I use it sometimes in some of my sessions. So I just make a little grid like that. Yeah, just make a grid. And I listen to someone, and I'm just going to put these crosses, wherever they speak. And it helps me to figure out where in time they are locating themselves. Yeah. And over here in the mediation situation, I could ask, well, what would that look like if you guys came to an agreement? I use the past tense, but I'm talking about the future. Yeah. So I need to account for what is the future vision. This is what's getting discounted. Or who knows? What was it that the family situation, what were the messages about trust in the family? You see what's missing, the past parent. Yeah. So I can locate ego states on an axis of time. This is called the ego state timeline model. And it helps me to figure out where are the areas of discounting? What gaps do I need to narrow? So this is one way of using this model. Does that make sense? It's pretty simple, yeah? Parent, adult, child, past, present, future, yeah? Okay. Now let's look at how else it can be used. Okay. It's a little bit stuck. Let me just stop sharing that and put that again. Okay. Let me just go back. So you can also use this model when you're finishing work with someone, or you can use it as a coaching tool. Let's look at this. So this is from actually a process I had for several years, a counseling process. And you ask the client to take some cards or objects. You have that grid and you ask them to locate their statements. You ask them, what did you get from our counseling? And then you ask them to put it in a particular box, yeah? So number one, I'm free from the inner merry-go-round, yeah? That was in the past, when you go into a racket and you're like ruminating, yeah? That was happening for a long time. I can take a bird's eye view on my life and separate rationally what is and isn't true. Yeah, straightforward adult here and now. Then I can very quickly identify company that is not good for me. Yeah. So in developing a nurturing parent in the now. If I am open, I will tap into the love present in the universe. Yeah. They understood this as a child. I think that's Adrian Lee who talks about this concept of a cosmic child. That wonder when you sometimes, I don't know, maybe that moment of pause when you had a meal at your grandmother's house, or there was a moment of wonder. Yeah, that's that cosmic child. Yeah. Now, number 5, I'm a worthy person. Here, self-esteem was placed in the child, but this is within the frame of the client, yeah? I will let go of what I cannot control, yeah, that is in the future, yeah, that letting go of that controlling parent. I can let go of my mother's negative influence, the 7. I believe in myself professionally. They put it in the future. It was about their future aspiration. And remember to breathe, yeah? Okay? So this is the model, and what I'm going to invite you to is this exercise, the coaching exercise, yeah? So coach each other on a chosen issue, just something coachable, actionable in a small mini session. You're going to have 10 minutes per person. Choose a contract, decide about your levels of vulnerability, okay? Why is this short? Because counseling, you may or may not know, we've got primary counseling and we've got complementary counseling. So you may be speaking to someone on a corridor. You may be just having a little conversation in passing, or to a trainee, or you meet someone at work and you have 10 minutes. And you can have those little conversations that are like gold dust or the oil and give someone a little push. You just kind of, giving them a little bit of water to grow their adult ego state, yeah? So you're like a little gardener that's going around. Yeah. Okay. So is the task clear? You're going to have 20 minutes, 10 minutes per person to coach each other on a small issue. Play with it. So we've got 10 minutes to close the workshop. We lost some people on the way, or there were some people who are a little bit, I don't know who they were. You know, when you've got like someone on Zoom, you don't know who that is. It's a bit of a strange one, isn't it? Yeah, okay. I would like to spend this 10 minutes in a small process to recognize where you got to, share reflections, yeah, to close the workshop so that people feel seen and accounted for. Yeah. How was this exercise? Hello, Claire. Welcome back, everyone. We lost 2 people on the way, quite possibly, yeah. Yeah, so what was the exercise like for you?
The idea. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Sure. Okay, thank you. I really enjoyed it. I thought there were a few things that came up which definitely helped me and the person that I was working with realize a few things. So without going into too much detail about it, it's about how the past can influence the present and then how that can influence the future. If that makes sense. Using the grid.
Yeah, yeah.
So it kind of shifted things in the session, in the coaching session, for me, and I believe for with the person I was working with as well.
And I noticed that you started speaking more slowly, or there was more presence, as if you were more rooted in the now, but also had your awareness in the future and the past.
Yes, yes. So it was a really good exercise. Thank you.
You're welcome, and thank you for engaging with it. Something powerful and present has emerged now in you.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm happy. I don't know if Camelia, did you want to come in? Because, or did you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, it was very powerful for me as well. I think I shared something, an issue that I've been reflecting on and talking about with colleagues in therapies. It's not the first time for me, but it was a way for me to kind of connect what's happening right now with my past and what the future in terms of what's the options that I have, and whether like I have an option that is very much in my child, and then I have an option that is very much more in adult. So it was very interesting to reflect on that. And then also I think the conversation, like talking about the issue and then reflecting on that, and then having the other person giving feedback and sharing whatever was going on for them, it was very rich as well.
Okay. So you're saying identifying options, making
Yeah.
it actionable, and accounting for different parts of the experience. That's what created for you the shift, yeah?
Yeah.
Wow. Wow, that sounds interesting. Yeah, okay. John, you wanted to speak as well.
Thank you. So, without any content, I guess using the timeline ego state idea as just helping to identify where somebody is psychologically, it was an interesting thing to hold. I mean, when you first said, "What did you think?" and then said exercise, at first I was thinking of the overall presentation about language and the different exercises. So I felt I was slightly wrong-footed because I was preempting what you were saying. But in this last exercise, the sequence, the timeline effect, cross-reference with the ego states. And then I started thinking about Burns' early writings on intuition, and when he was working as an army psychiatrist, and noticing that, when some people were asked a question, they would look out of the window to check the weather before they responded, because they were wanting to think about what would happen next. And it depended on people's career and time and the culture. And so kind of the link between the old and the new as well is what it brought up for me. And that sometimes ideas which seem wholly new in TA are not always completely new. They're more revisiting something perhaps to relook at.
Yeah. And we circle back to all sorts of ideas. So yeah, that's true that we circle back. And it's almost, again, you say, that integration, that rooting in the now with the eyes into the future and to the past. Yeah. Interesting. Okay. Anyone else? We've got 3 minutes. I've put the presentation here. You can download the PDF of the presentation. And also you can download the paper that we wrote with my colleague. It's called Ego State Trip or Ego State Trap. So you're very welcome to see, and you're going to have an example in a case study of using that model and the sort of deep dive into language. Yeah.
I just wanted to make a quick point about noticing in the past, and I thought it was a really useful exercise. I love doing it. That I really noticed how the child ego state was also an intergenerational child ego state, and that it was probably channeling my parents, my grandparents. I could sort of almost like hear that coming through. And I suppose perhaps I felt a bit more connected because I was sort of really focusing on what that past child would have said. It just made me connect more with something that goes back through generations, actually. Just a small reflection.
I think it's a huge one, actually, not a small one. Sometimes those things in tiny where something clicks, That's about the awareness we bring to day-to-day stuff as well, how we experience life and ourselves. Yeah, Thea. Yeah, is this how I pronounce your name, Thea?
Yes, yeah.
Thank you, Thea. Thank you. Okay.
I'd like to add something quick to what has been said, because yeah, in my exercise it was a similar thing, with me sort of being pulled by the future in many ways, and at the same time having like a I don't know, almost like a hand grabbing my leg or something, from the past. And all this talk about, because I feel like all of you mentioned the past in this, I don't know if in this way, but that's how it felt. To me, yeah. And I love this interplay. And I don't know what else to say. I still need time to reflect upon what happened. But yeah, it was useful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, David. Thank you. I think what emerged that we're going to close right now. I want to share with you. I did this one course in Spanish about this, working with your life purpose. It was with an organization from Chile, and they said in Spanish, "El futuro está codificado en el presente." The future is coded in the present, and that was in reference to the energy of your life purpose. That in some, when you think about the future, I think only when I get my CTA, when I get this, when I get that, yeah. And actually, the energy of your life purpose in the present. What is the present energy that combines the future and the present and is experience present centered? There's something so beautiful and poignant to be in the now and live your purpose now and enjoy it now, the results of your purpose now. Yeah, rather than getting ahead of yourself. So that's what emerged for me in response to you and how you talked about being rooted in the present. So yeah. Okay. Well, we've got Brigitta coming hello. Okay. So yes.
There's a thing, sorry, I just want to say one super quick thing. There's a thing, if you Google it, what you just said, Piotr, reminded me of this, and I'm gonna re-Google it myself. If you Google it, remembering the future, there's an entire thing about remembering the future. So,
Okay.
which I think ties into what you just said.
Okay. All right, lovely colleagues. So we're going to stop here. I thank you very much for being present here, opening your minds and hearts to all sorts of diversity, your comments, your curiosities, and your engagement in the exercises.